It wasn't a hunch. It was a cold, structural certainty. I stood in the temperature-controlled archives of Sterling and Stone architects, holding a document that shouldn't have existed. It wasn't a draft. It was a finalized, notarized transfer of ownership. 100% of the firm's voting shares were being signed over to my sister, Lucia. My name, the only name in the family attached to an actual architectural license, wasn't in it. Not once. 10 years of building this firm's foundation, gone with a single signature. Drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever been the person doing all the hard work while someone else took all the credit? I want to hear your story. I stood in that archive room, surrounded by the smell of old paper and dust, and for the first time in 10 years, I looked at the history of Sterling and Stone architects clearly. It wasn't a family business. It was a parasitic ecosystem. For a decade, I had been the invisible engine room of this firm. My father, James, liked to call himself the visionary. He was the one shaking hands at gala dinners, drinking scotch with developers, and talking about skylines and legacies. My sister, Lucia, was the head of aesthetics, a title my father invented so she could feel important while picking out curtain swatches and running the company Instagram account. They were the facade. They were the gleaming glass windows and the marble lobby that everyone stopped to admire. But I was the math. I was the physics. While Lucia was in Paris looking for inspiration for a lobby renovation, I was in the basement office at 3 a.m, calculating seismic load requirements for a $28 million skyscraper. While my father was charming the city council with vague promises of urban renewal, I was the one memorizing thousands of pages of zoning laws, fire codes, and structural compliance regulations to make sure his promises didn't result in a lawsuit or a collapsed building. I realized then that my competence had become my cage. I had made it look too easy. That's the danger of being good at the hard stuff. When you solve problems before anyone else even sees them, people assume there were never any problems to begin with. My father didn't see the late nights, the board exams, the continuing education credits I racked up to keep our licenses valid. He just saw that the permits always got approved. He just saw that the buildings didn't fall down. He thought it was magic or luck or just the natural order of things. There is a concept in my field that kept looping through my mind as I stared at that signature on the transfer document. It's called the load-bearing wall. In any structure, there are walls you can knock down to open up a space, to make it look airier, more modern, more like the open-concept penthouses Lucia loved to design. Those are partition walls. They are decorative. But then there is the load-bearing wall. It's usually thick, unglamorous, and sits right in the way of the pretty design. It carries the weight of the roof, the upper floors, the entire structural integrity of the building. If you remove a partition wall, you get a bigger room. If you remove a load-bearing wall, you get a catastrophe. My family looked at me and saw a partition wall. They saw something rigid, boring, and obstructive. They thought I was just taking up space that could be given to Lucia's fresh energy and creative vision. My father looked at me and thought, I can knock that down. I can replace that with something prettier, something that sparkles. He didn't understand the physics of his own life. He didn't understand that I wasn't just working in the building. I was holding it up. Every contract, every blueprint, every city approval relied on one thing. My professional seal. My red ink stamp with my license number on it. Without that stamp, Sterling and Stone was just a group of people drawing pretty pictures on napkins. I looked at the notarized paper again. It was dated 3 days ago. They had already done it. They had already swung the sledgehammer at the load-bearing wall, thinking they were just doing a little renovation. They had no idea that gravity was about to take over. I didn't feel sad anymore. Sadness is for people who think they have lost something. I realized, standing in that cold room, that I hadn't lost anything. They were the ones about to lose the roof over their heads. I sat in the silence of the archive room, surrounded by the smell of old paper and the hum of the ventilation system, and I forced myself to dissect my father's logic. It is easy to say he was just blinded by favoritism, that he simply loved Lucia more. But James was a businessman. He didn't build a firm this size on love. He built it on perception. And that was where I had failed. I had fallen into a trap that catches so many high performers. It's called the glass cliff of competence. For 10 years, I had made the impossible look effortless. When a zoning board threatened to shut down a project, I didn't run to James in a panic. I stayed up for 48 hours, found a loophole in the municipal code, and fixed it before he even unlocked his office door. When a contractor tried to use substandard steel, I didn't create a scene. I simply refused to sign the inspection report until the steel was replaced. I filtered out the noise. I absorbed the stress. I acted as a human shield for the firm so that James could focus on his vision and Lucia could focus on her vibes. But here is the dark side of mastery. When you solve problems before they ever touch the surface, people assume there were never any problems to begin with. James didn't see a crisis manager when he looked at me. He saw a glorified administrative assistant who liked math. He mistook my proficiency for simplicity. He looked at the clean lines of my finished blueprints and thought, how hard can that be? It's just lines on paper. And then he looked at Lucia. Lucia, who was always overwhelmed by her creative process. Lucia, who made a spectacle of every color palette choice. Lucia, who demanded applause for managing to send an email. Because she made everything look like a performance, James assumed she was doing something profound. He confused activity with achievement. He needed Lucia to be the genius. Fed his ego. If his flighty, charming mirror-image daughter was the CEO, it validated his belief that architecture was an art form, not a science. It validated his own laziness. If he admitted that my boring, technical, unglamorous work was the only thing keeping the lights on, he would have to admit that he had been useless for the last decade. He wasn't just choosing a successor. He was choosing a fantasy. I looked at the transfer document one last time. He was handing her the keys to a Ferrari, convinced that driving was as simple as looking good in the driver's seat. He didn't know that the engine block was sitting in my lap. A cold realization washed over me, chilling me deeper than the air-conditioned room. If I stayed, if I tried to fight this or argue my case or beg for my spot, I would just be reinforcing the dynamic. I would be the safety net again. I would be the one catching Lucia when she fell, fixing her mistakes at midnight, making her look competent while she took the credit and the equity. Staying wasn't loyalty anymore. It was complicity. I was the one enabling my own erasure. I stood up. My legs felt steady. The confusion was gone, replaced by a sharp, geometric clarity. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to explain the physics of why this would fail. I was just going to remove the physics. I walked out of the archive room and headed toward my office. I didn't look at the break room where Lucia was currently holding court, laughing about some fabric swatches. I didn't look at James's closed door. I had one objective. I needed to collect the one thing that truly belonged to me. I walked into my office, the only room in the building that didn't look like a Pinterest board. It was functional, cluttered with blueprints, code books, and scale models. I didn't pack my framed degrees. I didn't pack the awards. I didn't even pack the photo of me and my father from the groundbreaking of the Marina project 5 years ago. I opened the top drawer of my desk. There it was. My official architectural seal. A heavy, custom-made stamp with my name, Eliana Sterling, and my license number embossed in reverse. In the world of architecture, this stamp is the nuclear codes. Without it, a drawing is just a drawing. With it, a drawing becomes a legal document, a promise to the city and the public that the structure is safe, compliant, and liable. It was the only thing in the entire firm that James couldn't buy and Lucia couldn't fake. It was the only thing that made Sterling and Stone a legitimate architectural practice. I dropped the stamp into my purse. The weight of it felt significant, like an anchor being lifted. I sat down at my computer for the last time. I didn't write a manifesto. I didn't detail my grievances or list my contributions. Emotion is just bad data in a resignation. I typed 2 lines. To James Sterling and HR, effective immediately. I resign from my position as lead architect at Sterling & Stone. I have removed my personal property and my professional seal from the premises. Eliana Sterling. I hit send. Then I logged out, shut down the computer and placed my access card on the desk. I walked out of the office, past the glass conference room where Lucia was now showing fabric samples to a junior designer, laughing loudly. I walked past James's office, where he was likely on the phone, charming a client with promises I would no longer be keeping. I walked out the front door and into the cool afternoon air. I didn't look back. I got into my car, turned off my phone and drove home. The silence in my apartment was profound. For the first time in 10 years, I wasn't worrying about a deadline. I wasn't mentally calculating load capacities. But the peace didn't last long. When I finally turned my phone back on an hour later, it was vibrating with a rage that felt almost physical. 17 missed calls from James. 12 texts from Lucia. I opened the messages, scrolling through them with a detached curiosity. James. What is this? You can't just quit. We have the apex deadline next week. James. This is incredibly selfish, Eliana. After everything I've done for you, you're trying to sabotage your sister because you're jealous. Lucia. OMG, are you serious right now? Dad is freaking out. You're ruining my first week. You are such a drama queen. Come back and fix this. They didn't get it. They still thought this was a tantrum. They thought I was just being difficult, that I would cool off and come back to do the work like I always did. They saw my resignation as an emotional inconvenience, a little hiccup in their perfect plan. They had no idea that by walking out the door with my seal, I hadn't just quit. I had turned off the lights. I had unplugged the life support. I didn't reply. I didn't explain. I put the phone down and poured myself a glass of wine. They wanted to run the firm. Fine. Let them run it. Let them see how far vibes would get them with the city planning board. I sat on my couch, watching the sun set over the city skyline, a skyline I had helped build, one building at a time. They thought I was just a brick in the wall. They were about to find out what happens when you remove the keystone. The week passed in a strange, suspended silence. I didn't go to the office. I didn't answer emails. I spent my mornings reading books I had bought 3 years ago and never opened. I spent my afternoons walking through the city, looking at the buildings I had helped design, seeing them not as projects, but as monuments to my own invisible labor. My phone continued to buzz with increasingly frantic messages, but I had muted the notifications. The silence from my end was absolute. It was the only leverage I had ever truly possessed, and I was finally using it. Then came Friday, the day of the Apex presentation. The Apex skyscraper was the crown jewel of my father's career. A $28 million project that would redefine the city skyline. It was ambitious, complex, and precarious. Securing the contract required approval from the city planning board and, more importantly, from Catherine, the real estate tycoon financing the project. Catherine was legendary for her intolerance of incompetence. She didn't care about vision. She cared about return on investment and structural integrity. I didn't go to the meeting, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly what was happening in that boardroom. I knew Lucia. I knew James. And I knew the blueprints. James would have sent Lucia to lead the pitch. He believed her charm was the missing ingredient, the fresh energy that would dazzle Catherine. Lucia would have walked in wearing a designer suit that cost more than a junior architect's salary, carrying a portfolio of renderings that focused on the aesthetics, the light hitting the glass, the texture of the lobby marble, the flow of the open-air terraces. She would start with the story of the building. She would talk about how the Apex wasn't just a skyscraper. It was a vertical community. She would use words like synergy, elevation, and organic integration. James would be sitting next to her, beaming, convinced that this performance was what architecture was all about. And Catherine would be sitting at the head of the table, listening, waiting. Catherine was a woman who had built her empire by knowing exactly where every dollar went. She didn't build skyscrapers on vibes. She built them on steel and concrete. When Lucia finished her speech about the soul of the structure, Catherine would lean forward. She wouldn't smile. She would open the technical binder, the one I had prepared months ago, the one Lucia had likely never opened. "That's a lovely vision, Lucia," Catherine would say, her voice dry. "But let's talk about page 40, the seismic load calculations. Your proposal suggests a cantilevered terrace on the 30th floor. Given the wind shear at that altitude and the local fault lines, what specific structural reinforcements are you using to ensure the load distribution doesn't exceed the safety variance?" Catherine's first question would drain the room of oxygen. "Seismic load?" she'd ask, calm but sharp. Lucia wouldn't know what it meant. She'd try to steer toward vibes and finishes, anything but physics. "I'm not asking about feeling," Catherine would cut in. "I'm asking if the building will stand." Then Catherine would tap the blueprints spread across the table. "These don't have a stamp. City approval requires a licensed architect's seal. James, you haven't renewed your license in 5 years. Eliana's seal has carried every sterling and stone project for a decade. Where is she? And why are you presenting uncertified drawings for a $28 million build?" That was the kill switch. Without my seal, their glossy renderings were illegal cartoons. Catherine would close the binder, stand and end it. No submission, no trust, eligibility under review. Not a dramatic blast. Just the quiet collapse of a structure missing its load-bearing wall. I sat in my apartment as the clock passed 2, calm in a way that surprised me. I wanted the building built. I designed it. But sometimes something has to break cleanly before it can be fixed. 3 days later the firm was in freefall. Catherine didn't just reject Apex. She filed a formal complaint. That triggered a city audit. Every active project Sterling and Stone had was frozen until the licensed architect on record was confirmed. The architect on record was me, and I was gone. Panic spread through the office. Clients demanded answers. The city threatened fines. Money bled out. Lucia vanished to Palm Springs the moment Real work arrived. She loved the title when it meant picking furniture, not when it meant defending structural safety to a zoning commissioner. On Tuesday my email pinged. From James. No subject. 3 words. What do you want? In negotiation, silence is leverage. I waited 4 hours, then replied. Conference room B, tomorrow. 10 a.m. When I walked in, the building smelled like fear, not coffee. Cubicles. The receptionist looked relieved to see me alive. In the conference room James waited, older by a decade, sleeves rolled up in defeat. Lucia's chair was empty. We need your seal, he said. The city is threatening our license. Catherine will reconsider Apex if we fix compliance in 48 hours. Lucia isn't equipped. Lucia isn't an architect, I said. She's a decorator you handed a crown to. He bristled. She's your sister. You're letting the firm burn to prove a point. Come back. I'll give you a raise. A bonus. He still thought this was about money, like my competence was something he could buy the way he bought paperclips. I slid one folder across the table. I don't want a raise. I want equity. He read the terms, face paling. 51%. Controlling interest. And removal of Lucia from any executive or operational role. You want my company. It's not yours anymore. Right now you don't have a firm, you have a lease and a lawsuit. Without my license, this place is just expensive square footage. He whispered. This is extortion. This is the market price of competence. You gave the keys to someone who couldn't drive and she wrecked the car. I'll fix it. But I'm keeping it. He stared at the empty chair, the skyline, the math. If he signed, he lost control. If he didn't, he lost everything. His hand trembled as he signed. Order clicked into place. I called Catherine, promised seismic calculations and a revised zoning strategy that added 2 floors without breaking shadow ordinances. She agreed to meet that night. Professional to professional. In Lucia's old office, surrounded by candles and swatches, I cleared the desk for blueprints. I rehired the senior draftsman with raises and equity. By lunch they were back. Lucia and James believed in occupancy. Sit in the big chair where the title, you own the power. I believe in ownership, of skills, license and knowledge. You can evict an occupant. You can't evict the foundation. I stamped the Apex plans in red ink. Eliana Sterling. Licensed architect. Not revenge. Justice. Evict the squatters, rebuild the structure and get back to work. I had a skyscraper to finish.